Abazali, molweni kwakhona, and ababengasibonanga uxolo ndiyathanda uyila ke kodwa ababengasibonanga molweni kwakhona igama lami isenguvuyo Giba. So I think for the people that have actually listened to the first segment of the exhibition, this is now the discussion, but the discussion that we're having, so usually into endivenza sometimes is to have a conversation that will either enlighten us as musicians, enlighten us as a community, enlighten us as, well, I'll speak for myself as a visual artist. And then there are people like Gia, you know. By the way, I think we haven't mentioned just the importance of Gianetsi. Gianetsi tells our jazz stories to the world of radio. I think maybe I didn't mention that, but Ugia has also played like a crucial role into telling the jazz story, particularly of South Africa, but for now we'll stick to the Eastern Cape. So I have a beautiful quartet, I'll call it. And then, so just by introduction from myself, that is Struan Douglas. So Struan Douglas, if you go to the table, the story of jazz, volume 1 and volume 2. But yeah, guys, those are my books. Nah? If you want to get your own books, you ask Struan to sell you his book. But these ones are mine. And then next to Brastru, you have Put Elijah. So Put Elijah is from Ilam, and we'll sort of get to his story as we're sitting and listening to the stories that everyone has to tell. And then, but yeah, in my world, I think it's important kulento yo archival. Sizawuthi ngumgcini wamaxesha. Because kaloku amaxesha ayahamba, but abantu are different. Nathi sizelelwe phezu music, but asibazi abanye abantu babesenza ntoni. But ke with Upra Elijah, we know that we can reference izinto mhlambi esikwazi uzireferensa back to the time that he can, to his best ability. Next to him, we have Siphokazi Ngxokolo-Bili. Kudala ke ndasebenza noSiphoki. I've also sort of roped her in my conversations into this exhibition. So this is not the first time Siphokazi has been a part of this conversation. She's a vocalist and she's a jazz singer. She's an educator. She's anything nice, you know, in the music. And next to him, of course, the man that does not need introduction, Retsi. Retsi Pule ke, as we know, istory sakhe ungumntu walapha ephondweni. Yeah, man. Because before I need to come to you, ndisibaninzi mos abantu abafotayo apha emhlabeni. So bandinofika ndisithi kuwe ndifuna ukufota ndizakwenza ube mhle, ndibe mnandi ndinxibe into endingayaziyo okanye mhlawumbi uBretsi in his words bengandiyothenga isonka. He's definitely not going to listen to me. Yeah, man. So like I say, in the music we learn, and we learn in different ways. So again, if we then in this conversation, we're going to look at the healing of just the community, the healing of what music does for us. But before we look at that, because when we receive music, we receive it as healing. We're already healing, but there are people behind the music, and then there's a lot of things that go behind the music. You know. It could be other people, you know, the story of Chet Baker. Chet Baker, you know, was a troubled soul, but his music heals us all. And I mean, you know, so the reason that these people are sitting here is to have a discussion around what the music means to them and what it means. So this is going to be a cross discussion. I will talk, Tina, but Nombasa, Klambi, we might pose a question to you. If you have a question, you can throw it in at any time. I'm just speaking to everyone, but I'm using your name at that. So, starting right across, before we even introduce the panel, or them introducing themselves, the exhibition itself. Well, I made a statement, but I'm going to read the parts that I think are important in the statement that I made. So, music creation, collection, and photography lies at the heart of many young people who are interested in pursuing these careers. Again, I don't want to use the word career, but I'll use the word career today because it's something that people, relate to easily, as opposed to if I said photography was a calling to me, as opposed to being employed to actually deliver images. But for me, it's a total different story because if there's no camera, I'm not able to tell the pain of the next person. So my mission as a photographer has been to capture, impart, and link the bridge between the young and old musicians, and to consolidate the gap between diverse genres of the music, by showcasing these images of musicians, practitioners, and creatives from Gqeberha and neighboring cities. This exhibition's aim is to celebrate the local talent and history in and around the Eastern Cape, and to re-establish the broader family and community context in the music in the Eastern Cape. So we look at ways where we can actually make collaborations, because, I must commend what Ustru has done and us as a team, because we come as separate entities, but with collaboration, this becomes to be a story that we can all tell in one different story. So I think before we can have the questions and why they're here, I think everyone should just go ahead and introduce themselves. And then we can start with our conversation. And then, like I said, the conversation is back and forth. If anyone has a question, you can raise your hand. If anyone has something to offer us. So we're learning from one another. This is not a panel and closed discussion. We're learning from one another. So if you have a question you want to ask, or if you have a way, maybe we can better the way we do things in terms of singing, you can just let us know, and then we'll have the discussion. So I'll pass on the mic right across, and then everyone can just go ahead and introduce themselves before we go ahead with our conversation.
Oh, good evening. Mulweni kwakhona. Dingu Retsi, Pule. Mandinike imbeko yenu man kulula kumaniphakame. Yes. Yeah. Isinintsi sethu apha sindazi ndingumculi nolohlanga lokucula luthatha ekhaya. Yeah, kwifamily yakulo mama kwaqiniwe kanjalo ucula masingene kule ndawo ye-composition. Yes. Composition na iyandifikela ingoma mhlawumbi ifika mhlawumbi ngo la 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 ndingafaka amazwi ndihlale phansi nesiqu sam ndibona uba okay esi structure sale ngoma sifanele into yoba ibe lusizi le ngoma okanye ibe ingoma emnandi ndinomfanekiso ngaphakathi ndigqibe uba hayi fanele uba kwilayini ethile ndifake amazwi ahambelanayo igcine isense yaloo ngoma loo composition leyo umuntu xa imameleyo ahambe namba uthi lo mntu ndirayize iclimax yaloo ngoma leyo ngexesha ifike ngamazwi uqala ndingekayifumana ingoma ubuqubayo ndiyiguqulisa other side other way round. Yes, indlela endiyijonga ngayo into ye-composition mandihlale nje ndinganabi kakhulu mandihlala apha kwi-composition uba ingoma yam ndiyakha njani na. Enkosi.
Molweni, igama lam nguSiphokazi Ngxokolo-Bili, inzalelwane yasemdantsane, umamngwevu utshanga esirhudulu. For me, i-jazz into ebaluleke kakhulu ngoba ngumculo ndinothi othunga obhala social aesthetic ye-community zethu. Nelizwi lelo xesha, the voice of that specific time, jazz is able to depict that specific era or that specific message. So ndingumntu ke wakwa jazz ngokutsho. Ndingancebeleni utata wam wayecula kwi-Bukky Brothers no tata uJohnny Gyan. Ndikhule ke kulo mculo ndawuthanda nam and followed my passion through music. I'm a music educator, I'm a cultural worker, I have a passion for archives and uniting communities through the music. Ndiyabulela.
Molweni. My name is Elijah Madiba. Being here in the Eastern Cape, my surname has sort of been changed now into a Xhosa surname, so people call me Madiba, but I'm not Madiba, I'm Madiba. It's written the same way, so it gets confusing, Madiba and Madiba. I work for Rhodes University in an institute called the International Library of African Music. And what we focused on previously was just on traditional music, traditional African music. And it's an archive, so we've got recordings of traditional music dating from around the 1920s, 1928 or so until now. And I mean, the main thing about the archives is we keep the music, but we call ourselves a living archive in that we don't just keep the music, we try and give back the music to the people or places where it was recorded, so that people can have at least a snapshot of how the music sounded in those times. So that's what we do. We've got a program which we repatriate the music, returning back the music. But also, one of the things that we do is also, like I said, previously we were just focusing on traditional music. But right now we are basically focusing on any music that is African. Yeah, so it can be anything now, including jazz. So we've had a program that ran from around 2009, which started in PE. It's called the Generations of Jazz, and it grew and continued to Queenstown, King Williamstown, and East London. And what we do there is we focus on musicians or jazz musicians who are not known or not famous, but have really carried and taught all these musicians that we know who are famous. In PE, for an example, we were focusing on musicians such as Reverend Pasha and people like Dudley Tito. Those people really taught a lot of musicians that we know, Bozim Ngawana, Fayafaku, so on, but their story was not told. So what we've been doing is trying to collect their stories, and keep them in the archive for researchers and anybody else who wants to know about the music that they were doing in the 1940s, so on, until now. And that has, like I said, moved from PE to King Williamstown to Queenstown, so on. That's where we met people like Retsi Pule. And through our project, we managed to also assist him and record his album. The album that they're talking about, the looking to the future. We basically, put together that album, helping him out so that he can continue sharing his music and his story. And so that's some of the things that we do. I think at ILM we've got so many projects that are so different, you know, and if I was to talk about all of them, it will really take a lot of time. So I think I just wanted to focus on the generations of jazz, because it sort of links up to what we're doing here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And yes, I'm the author of the Story of South African Jazz book series. So I think for me, the question is why jazz, and why are we taken to jazz? And it was Faye who actually gave me the answer to that. He says, look, I didn't choose jazz, jazz chose me. So I think this is the interesting question, is why is jazz choosing these kind of people that we are? And over the last 2 years, we've been bringing musicians from all over Europe here, and we've been doing fantastic shows and showing the way that jazz crosses borders, crosses genres, crosses races, it crosses over everywhere. And the reason why jazz is probably what Claude Depper said is, you know, he said the depression, the oppression, the suppression. So I think, you know, we've been at the forefront of so many different struggles as human beings, you know, and those are the exiles, but not only the exiles we're talking about the exiles. The people who are here have their own struggles. You know, we're talking about individuals with our own personal stories, our lives, and what we're trying to overcome as people. So for me, the question is why jazz, and why we're all being drawn to jazz is this communal and collective spirit of healing. You know, so that's what I would like to put forward today, is that, you know, we have so much to give to one another, so much to share with one another, but the commonality is this sense of healing. So thank you so much.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, guys. That was quite something. Thank you, Spooky. Thank you, Stru. Put Elijah and Retsi. So, well, going further into, we'll start with our discussion. I don't want us to maybe, as much as we might maybe ask Ustru to tell us the history of jazz music as he knows it. I think some of us, maybe our histories are not the same. Like mine, I didn't know jazz music until 2010. I mean, I grew up in books. I grew up reading books, so I didn't have friends. And I didn't grow up in a musical family. Books were my friends. But while other kids were playing, because there was just, you know, when people think that there's something weird with you, and I think up until this day, people think that there's something weird with you when you play jazz music 24/7. You know, abanye bathi lo mculo uyalalisa, umculo wabantu abadala, umculo otikayo, you know. But what I also want us to look at is just the diversity of music genres and how colorful they are in South Africa. But any type of sound, we might argue all day, is actually birthed by jazz music, because people say jazz music is about playing the wrong notes. You know, there's a perception that, you know, jazz musicians play all the wrong notes. But like we had actually established in the workshop, that the wrong notes are actually what makes you be able to practice your creativity as best as you can. So also then, so there's an element of jazz, and then there's an element of making music African. So I always, again, as we're discussing here today, the healing was actually the harmonies and just the singing, you know. And for a moment, we didn't have the instruments. You know, I'm going to then take us to what makes music African. So if you look at umombelo, you know, you find many jazz musicians that find inspiration to umombelo okanye their day-to-day activities. So abantu abaninzi actually, mhlawumbe kwabo kwakho amagqirha, but someone couldn't ombela because they didn't understand bawokombela indoni, but they could translate the music, or they could translate their childhood into an instrument, because now they have a way of actually relating how they grew up. So we are also then, that's what I'd like to think makes music so African, is that everywhere we go, uzawumazi uJerusalem, uJerusalem liculo lasekhaya, uwakrazulwa yinto oyive ekhaya. It does not matter if somebody plays it in an instrument or, but akusoze ungayazi imelodi kawakrazulwa okanye uJerusalem. So we are not going to talk about that, but what I want us to talk about, maybe Stu, this question is going to come. So I'm gonna jump people because we're gonna drive this as short as we can, right? But what I want you to maybe look at for us is the history as you hear of the music and the history as you've noticed of it, and what maybe made you decide at some point, I need to write South African jazz stories. So I want you to tell us what was why did you, I mean, you could have been a trumpet player, you could have been a theater somebody, but narrating music stories. But before you even went into the instrument, you went to the words. So maybe let us just, at the history as you hear it, so that you're able to narrate your story. Maybe can we just start on that? And then we'll again cap it at maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll ask the next question to the next person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think, we're dealing with a story that hasn't been written. We're dealing with a history that hasn't been properly told, and we're dealing with heroes whose lives have not been appropriately addressed and passed on, and that's why at this moment we're with Bra Retsi and Bra Claude to make sure that the elders today and the living memory is passed on. Why me? I'm doing it instead of a career in business perhaps, is because I was pretty much instructed to do it by my elders. First of all was Jim Bailey, the founder of Drum Magazine. He did much the same thing with Drum Magazine, these stories of Todd Machakiza, Can Temba, and all the intellectuals, the writers and the musicians of that era. Their legacies were preserved through Drum Magazine. So it is kind of a duty that we do. And I think the person who really pushed me over the edge with this was Winston Mankunku in 99 or 2000. I personally, I'd experienced the power of the music to heal, and then I'd got to know the person himself, Winston Mankunku, and realized his struggle was in telling his story. His story was not being told, and he actually said, we need guys like you who can write to tell our stories. So I carried the story forward, and then I got to Durban amongst the great Durban musicians, and Sadumo and Gidi, the famous penny whistler. And he said, our story needs to be told. And he was in a band with Winston and Beki Masaleku, and incredible stories. So I think at that stage, I really had to just do this work and tell the story and sacrifice myself. And it is exactly as the Buddha had once said, that giving is receiving. So by opening yourself up and giving over to the story and allowing the story to pass through you, they give back to you that creative spirit. So today you find me able to join in and actually play some music and participate in the healing. And that's just through the giving to the story. So I think that would be, my contribution to the future generations is help tell the stories, help respect the elders, help grow with the elders, because that giving is coming straight back to you 10 times over in the experience and the love that you receive.
Thank you so much, but let's give Struan a round of applause. I think before we do, we just need to understand, or maybe I think I would like to make more emphasis on just how important the work he's doing. Because, archive is very important. 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, I'd want my story being told as Vuyo Giba. Out there, as much as we think that we play the music, I'm saying we because I'm speaking in a collective form, but no one knows that somebody is actually looking away from the music and looking from afar actually in the music, and then they can narrate the story in the music. So Struan's work is very important, particularly in the jazz story, because the archive, I think we're still lacking it. So guys, please let us give Struan Douglas a round of applause. Okay, so we're going to go into the musical question, and this question, or maybe the next statement, is for Siphokazi. And the reason why is because when I created the works around, I also looked at standards, which, well, in fact, it's music that's composed in the Eastern Cape, but they've traveled so much that they are celebrated as South African standards. So at school, at universities, abroad, globally, you would find that Ula Kuchoni Langa, composed by Makwenkwe Maketa Vashe, always a local Qobo Kwantuzu Pukayo. Of course, I'm sure there are people from Qobza here. Hola. And then we have, again, we look at how music is sang, because Ula Kuchoni Langa, you can find it in Dutuzo's piano composition. And again, I think I'll get more into it once I'm asking Spoki the question, but we need to talk about the song Ula Kuchoni Langa and how it's delivered, or how it's normally delivered, or what I think it should be delivered, or how it should be delivered. I don't know, but that's another thing. We'll discuss that in Spoki when I ask her the question. So the next composition was by Ellen Mzamusilinga, Unkilo Nkilo. So these are songs that are composed in the Eastern Cape, and most of them zingoma zasema simini. And this is where, again, there's this thing that abanye abantu ngokusakhula okanye ke when they started with the music, abanye babengakwazi uthenga instruments, but the way that they could make up for it was to actually sing while the others were playing instruments. So Unkilo, sorry, was actually made quite famous by Miriam Makeba. She took it to the international stages. So before we even knew that there was Ngxokolo-Bili of Miriam Makeba, there was actually Ngxokolo-Bili of Alan Silinga. Yeah, man. And then the third composition is Bra Winston's Yakhalingomo. In fact, I had actually made a note, because I think the note that I made on this one spoke to my heart. And I think I had heard somebody, you had reasoned the same way, Stru. I think it was Gia that was reading your layout for Yakalingom. So the note I made is the anthemic tune was written by the late great tenor saxophonist Winston Mankungungozi, which is at once a call to action, an open letter, and a prayer. Recorded in 1968 as a cry, mourning Sharpeville massacre. Till this day, it remains a cry, a mourn, and a prayer. To fight gender-based violence against women and children, it then builds the conversation around the center that jazz itself, from histories to skill to sustainable strategies of collaboration with other forms and community outreach through music and song. The reason I read that statement is because, Yakalingom is such a sad song. And Winston Mangungu used it to actually fight whatever he was fighting at the time. I can't speak on that because I wasn't born, so I do not want to speak on pain that I do not understand. But for me, as I grew older into the music, I understood just the pain that was in the music itself. So, Spoki, I think the question around these standards, I mean, so you have Ula Kuchoni Langa. So, Ula Kuchoni Langa, there are lines, Doamba ndikufuna ezindlini nasezitratweni ezibhedlele nasechele. So, do you understand that this is at the time of, oppression. So, if you do not find your family member at home, you have to go at least find in the streets. If you do not find them in the streets, you go to the prison cells to see if he's not there. If he's not at the prison cells, you go to the hospital to go identify a body. But if he's not at the hospital, he's probably at a cemetery somewhere. So it's a very painful song, And I think the responsibility, the minute it took to jazz, because then it took with instrument. So for me, the instrument is very subtle, yet very loud. It does not say a lot, but it really does say a lot. So you find now, I'll speak to just to the vocals and maybe the history of the vocals and the fact that maybe it's been made in contemporary music, and then you find people singing the song happily, you know, singing it and then, you know, just singing it happily, man, but it's a very sad song. So I think I just want your views on just preserving not only the music, but its meaning, the pain, and whatsoever not that was within the song. Maybe speak on that. I'm not going to say what. I'm just going to speak on that. Let us know what can we do to preserve not only the song, but the pain as well, and the story to narrate it better. Because the music Moskutua keeps on evolving.
Thank you so much, Vuyo, for that important question. I think the biggest conundrum or the biggest elephant in the room currently, now that we are facing, is giving istima to the memory. No? When we speak of memory or cultural memory and heritage, we go back, someone's like archives. No? And that also means jazz forms a huge part of the archive, right? The sound, the narratives, the historiographies form a huge part of our archives. Ngoba zinembali of, I don't want to say the backdrop of our history, but they formed an important voice or a storyline within our historiographies. Umzekelo, Vuyo was talking about Lakuchonelanga. We know we come from an era of apartheid, and I think in talking about the archive, it's also important to say, for us, it's very important to redress the archive. All hlobo wenza ngalo Vuyo. Redress it in a way that makes it listenable or making it interesting for nentsha ekhulayo, so that azokhula elazi ibali Winston Mankunku and why he composed Yakhalinkomo. Because now we are in an era of digital transformation where it's easy to just log on to YouTube and listen to ingoma of umntu ecula Yakhalinkomo in their own interpretation. If we are to emphasize the importance of redressing the archive and our stories, then we also give importance to the memory of composers of Lakuchonelanga, why they composed those specific compositions, and also Nati as performers, how we can best sort of perform or ngathi ukhuphela le message azenayo composer in our own way.
Thank you so much, guys. I hope Usemvilo song goes parky. Can we please give her a round of applause? Okay, so the next question is going to go to Uput Elijah. No? But again, the reason I'm taking this question to him, because I do not want to say we do something similar, because I find he's quite important, because if there's no music, there's nothing for me to either write about or to photograph. But like I said, Ukunyango Kwetyala was created because, you know, asina archive yetu would come in the form of abantu besuka PPP, and then you'd find that unombasa is no longer nombasa, unombaso. Yeah. So I'm just looking to sort of having Uput Elijah just to tell us how important it is to archive. And it's so important that he's archiving music. And it's so important that the music that he's archiving is African. So the question for you, But Elijah, is why, I mean, your recordings, like you said, they go as far as in the 1980s. 1928, yeah, I think I'm saying it right, guys, and Kosho. 1920s, thank you. Yes, so, I mean, your recordings go as far as 1920s, no? And I think until recently, because I forget to mention that I was a part of a project that was called Embracing Africanism in Song. So it was chasing Umombelo. It was also chasing the history of soul jazzmen, which again, so I'm always preaching the story of jazz music. So my call was to actually put up conversations like around the music. So Ndaketu Umombelo, Ndaketa and soul jazzmen. So that was my study. So part of the tasks that we had was to actually travel to Ilam. This is where I met Uput Elijah. And of course, you know, being in a space where you see instruments you've never seen, because you'd find that Western jazz gives you guitar instead of makoyane, and you know, but for me, being at Ilam, it meant that I need to embrace who I am, and I actually needed to ask so many questions because there were so many instruments that I had never seen. But the instruments zakwandu, mhlambi ikatari yenziwe ngebox yeparafini, but it's an instrument on its own. So for me, those spoke for the guitars because we didn't have Western instruments. So I think in that, or having said that, with Elijah, I'm so happy that we get to sit and maybe I'm able to ask you this question, right? So the question that I have, and I think maybe you can tell us all, is why is archiving important? But most importantly, why did you think that you needed to go as early as the years that you've gone? And if you look at the music today and the easy, you know, digital does, and why do you think it's still important to preserve the work that you're doing? And what are maybe, you know, partnership for sustainability between as the young generation and as the work that's done at ILAM, you know, a partnership for what are the things that we need to look at to actually make sure that we are archived in the right way, in no particular order? That's one question, but you can touch on these points.
I had about 4 or 5 questions there. But okay. Let me put it this way. The importance of archiving or preserving the music. I don't like using the word preserve. Maybe let me put that aside for now and talk about archiving and why at that time Hugh Tracy started doing that. From what we read and what we've heard from his children, grandchildren, so on, is that Hugh Tracy, because he came down to Africa in the early 20s, so let's just say around 1920, just after the First World War. When was the First World War? 1915. Okay, so yeah, I'm not... Okay, I think maybe I say 1920 after the World War, which came in 1923. Okay, but anyway, he came down after the World War, and in the place where he was, it was a farm, and the reason for him being there was for farming tobacco in Zimbabwe, and he had people singing, and then he got drawn to that. They're singing and wanted to record that. But what he noticed was that even from that time in the 20s, already you would see that there are people coming from other countries, other towns into the same spaces, and their music influences the music that is played in that area and sort of creating a new kind of music, which basically means that in 1920, the music will sound like this, and then 3-4 people come from different places. They start playing together with others. In 1926, the music has already taken a different kind of form. And he felt it was important to not stop the change, but to take a snapshot of what was happening at a particular time. So in 1920, this is how the music was sounding like. Now in 1926, this is how it's sounding like in this area, so on. It keeps changing. And you must know that even when we look at traditional music, it's not sounding the way it was sounding before. We always like saying, oh, Mandulu, it was sounding like this, like that. This is what we're playing. It's not really the thing. It keeps changing because people change and people get influenced by different things. Remember also when we are creating music, if you ask a composer, how did you write this song? He'll say, I heard the birds sounding, doing this and that, and then I got an idea to write it like this. But in my mind, I was hearing the music of so-and-so, playing one song, and then I thought, I could make a melody that goes like that. So it just tells you we don't stay one place. We are influenced by different things, and we keep moving. And so archiving for us, it's important in that we get to take a snapshot of those times like that. Not changing them, but just saying, this time, this is what was happening. You look at our time now, just between 1990 and now, how many genres have come up? They just keep changing and they're moving around like that. So we've got to capture those genres, and you can show people, this is how we've been moving. We've moved from this one to this one. Now we are here like that. But also one other thing that is important when we are archiving is, you see now everybody, we can call everyone an archivist because you've got a camera and you're taking snapshots and all that. But if we were to ask everyone, what did you write about what you took there? They've written nothing. So now we end up with Nombasa's archive of pictures or songs. We don't know who was singing there, when was this person singing, what was happening in that place, so on. So if it is not written, if you do not write what is happening at that time, that picture, that sound, that whatever it is, becomes meaningless because we do not know what it's all about. And so archiving is accompanied by that, writing the story. It's not really writing the story, but just the information about what is going on here in this picture. It's a picture of so-and-so at this function, this was happening, and so that way we can be able to tell what the story of the thing is. So it is important to, when you are archiving, accompany that with something written so that it can help the people in the future. We've got artifacts and things in the archive that are sitting there, which are basically useless in that when researchers come in and they want to know what is this about, we have no information, we can't tell them what it is about, just have a nice picture. And it ends there. And so what good is a nice picture if it's not telling a story? Yeah, and so that's for us or for me, what archiving is all about. I hope I had answered all the 7 questions that I had.
I think you did, Ngxokolo-Bili. I think you did. And so I'm so happy that I have people like Uluba that are actually listening, because, when you archive, it's very important to actually remember. So it's something that I learned in my archive, that, if I do not label each artwork or maybe put them, in an order to say this day was this day, and then I'm lucky that I remember the faces, then it's all gone. But again, I think in terms of archiving, that's very important, but memory then serves you to say, I did this at wherever, but the next person does not know. I think that's what archive talks about. So Nkosi kakhulu Uput Elijah, you've actually answered our question. So please guys, let's give Uput Elijah another round of applause. Okay. So before we open the floor to anyone that has any questions, to anyone that would like to have like a cross conversation with us, but we'll open the cross conversation for about 10 minutes and then we cap it at that. We have Retsi. So Retsi is our principal musician for today. I mean, ikona landeta iti save the best for last. Yabon bacho musabelung. Kodwa kuphinde kuthiwe kwantu uqala phezulu and then uhle nayo. Yabon. So, but what I've decided to do was to actually ask everyone their questions. And then I do not want to ask Retsi any question more than I want him to sort of give us the history of Izwelicha and the music and where they used to jam, where there was music at any time, and where he sees Izwelicha back in the day, and then where he sees Izwelicha today and surrounding areas. So I don't have a question for you, Retsi, but I just have that request that you tell us the history of Izwelicha and the music. You tell us about the Slow Food Brothers, because I've seen you there as well. You tell us about the importance of the work that you do. You've also been to Cape Town. You were honored with Reverend Pasha and Dr. Tete Mbambisa, and then you also received an award. So I want you to tell us about yourself, and I'll listen from a corner.
Enkosi. Funa nindive kakuhle ngesixhosa sasekhaya. Yes. Andizoqala ngoZwelicha. uZwelicha ulekelwa yiGinsberg. uZwelicha comes after Ginsberg location. Uzalwa yiGinsberg. Mna bendihlala eZawula Street. Kwesi start behlala ubantu biko. Mna ndiqonde kakuhle bethu naloo nto leyo. So before Zwelicha. So ndakhulela apha kubazali babazali bam apha nasemuntu abazali bam beseMonti. Apha ekhuleni kwam eGinsberg location. Bendimamela kakhulu abantu bangobhuti abasebengomeni ye-jazz. Ewe ndikhule ezikwayareni zesikolo ngisemncinci ne-adult schools choirs. Ndakhulela kakhona nasecaweni ndicula ii-hymns zase-church. Choral music ne-hymns kanjalo. Kodwa kum ndakuthanda kakhulu ingoma ucandelo lomculo eli-inclined kwi-jazz music. Yes, ndingaziyekanga ezixelelayo. Ndikhule sibancinci simamela ifamily zoGawe, oBudyaleki, bene-close harmony groups becula phaya. This jazz ndiyithandayo khona phaya. Kwakho iband kwakuthiwa zii-melodies. Ezi melodies le band yayizalwa ngutata owayi-inspector of schools, Mr. Mancu, enekwayari yakuthiwa liXhanti lokwayari leso. Bancinci ngoko sizimamele siye ewehall, le hall lapha simamele kacula iXhanti phaya. Simamele nababhuti ndithetha ngabo ezifamily sicula ijazz. Simamele babarekhoda noma bayapractice. Simamele phaa sibancinci, simamele emnyango, simamele istyle sengoma, i-approach yabo, enza ingoma baziva kwiradio nabo, bayitolike ngohlobo lwabo, yesilungu bayitolike ngesintu. Simamele thini kwenziwa ngolu hlobo. Sifike ekhaya silinganise laa nto bebesiva phaya. Sakhula ifamily, I think ngo-1963 kuba ikhulile saya kwaZwelicha. Siya kuZwelicha ke ngoku lo bembuza. Fika kwaZwelicha apha uZwelicha abantu usemtsha nengoma ngoma enoqaqamba ndithi istyle sasiyintoni na. But kwakho iband kwakuthiwa zii-Blowing Stars Yeah. Abantu culayo. Kudlala instruments. Badala ngobhuta ababantu basuka kwi-town nge-town bezokusebenza eqonce kulaa factory wakuthiwa yi-Good Hope beze ngokusebenza benohlanga lwengoma nabo bafomishana masithini ingoma asishiyanga ekhaya kwiindawo siphela kuzo masenze ingoma masenze that time ke yayiseninzi yayisenkulu into ye-big bands kwelo xesha noba kwi-competition zonobuhle intoni kuzawuba kwi-band masibekho iband endilisekileyo edlala phaya kokhala ngeband ke lo xesha ndiye ndiyomamela pha le band idlala ntoni nathine badlala nengoma zesintu ze-jazz yabo African jazz babengadlali nje American jazz no African jazz yabo bayidlale bayitolike ngohlobo lwabo badlale pha ndimamele nathi ekhaya sinazo ii-records ze-jazz simamele nditelekise pha jini bayitolika ngolu hlobo le ngoma yesingesi bona ngolu hlobo ndinomdla ndimamele anti ndisuka phaa kwezaa melodies phaa kulaa Ginsberg ewe ndihamba nalo mculo ndiwuthandayo ndimamela aba bantu bayenza ngolu hlobo le nto bayenza ngolu hlobo le nto bayenza ngolu hlobo le nto sikhule simamele phaya nam ndibuze wena ukucela lokucula ewe bakhona abantu abafuna ukucula bona ungabathini ndibathi rope in ndibanike olwazi esisiphiwo sam sengoma hayi unosiphiwo noba mhlawumbi ucula nesiphiwo unetalente sumanje phaya ukhwazi uholoze phaa linesi voice yakho mayivakale into oyithethayo uba ingoma yokonwaba mayibonakale ebusweni kuwe uba ulusizi mayibonakale yonke le nto bendiyithetha apha emini ndincedisa abantu abalula kunam bendisenza ngolo hlobo nguzwelisha ke lowo enkosi kakhulu
Enkosi kakhulu Bra Retsi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Again, I mean, a man like Bra Retsi does not come every day in our lives. Sawuhlala ke sibulela into ba apho sihamba khona nathi ude wafunyanwa nasithi. Thank you so much. You know, so I'm going to open the floor to either if anyone has a question, not, or if anyone has something to say, not. If not, mna ke ndizawuza emntwini ndingqale kuwe. Kodwa ke to open the floor, no? Kia, I'll ask this question to Upuchester. Oh, akekho phandle nombasa. Where's Chester? Oh, nasi sandla ke. Xolo bhuti omkhulu. Nkosi kakhulu.
Molweni ngale emva kwemini. And I am not exactly sure when, in what you are doing, you start about the history of jazz in South Africa. I've heard you talking about Omankungungos, record Ishango 1968 and so forth and so forth. But the common thing in South Africa that is prevailing is that the dominant musician in the past, that was before Omankungu, no ban, was keeping wickets. So if we narrate our history here in South Africa without mentioning the name of keeping wickets, I think we'll be missing the point. And secondly, I also think you should consider talking about the musicians of the past, like say Eric Nomvet in East London, iband yakhe kwakusithiwa yahavana zalandelela. I think kubanakane nomnye benifuna umention. Yeah, okay, I think this is sort of a joke. Yeah, yeah. Then I also think this one is just a joke. Uthi abantu balapha wena bhuti abakwazi pronounce kahle surname yakho bathi uMadiba. But do you know ukuthi Philip Taban has a song that says Pamba Madiba? Do you know that? So perhaps I'm the only one who can pronounce his name properly. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Oh man, please let's give him a round of applause. So I think I'll answer that. Nkosi kakhulu Puti for that statement, and Nkosi kakhulu for that question. So I think ubungekho ngotyana when we started introducing the exhibition. The exhibition is meant for the Eastern Cape. I'm the photographer that actually took this work, but at the time Eric Nomvete was alive. I wasn't. But okay, ndim umntu wale exhibition, pictures zezam. So I think ufike mhlambi sendiyicacisile ndisithi yonke into esiyibona apha yasephondweni. And then likhona icala elilapha elinoSpencer Andile, uLex, uRetsi, uFeya, uTete Mbambisa, no Reverend Patrick Pasha. So I think no akho ngxaki. I think ndiyacacisa nje ba wena ufike sendiyichazisile into endiyenzayo apha. So had I been alive at the time ka Eric Nomvete could have been there. Apha silwa nento ye-archive. I have not had a chance to archive where Eric Nomvete, your Oprisimanis, your Zimngawana's, but I was lucky enough to catch Bra Spencer. I was lucky enough to capture Reverend Patrick Pasha, and I'm lucky enough to work with Bra Retsi. Okay, no problem.
Thank you. I can also say the SABC has got a lot of music of the past. Like say for instance, Retsi lo ingoma yakhe uthi intombi zimbini zintathu emdizeni ufumene intombi emdizeni diver over umhlobo wenene kwakusithiwa i-radio bantu ngoko, but you cannot get that record uthi uyayithenga ikwi-archives ze-SABC. Aba Eric Nomvete ndithetha ngabo nabanye ne-transistors, that music is there kwi-SABC. Kwakukho inkqubo eyayisithi amaqela ethu, that was being done by uSiganeko Njokweni no Fezile Wochela. So my suggestion is that in whatever you are doing, do not forget to visit the SABC and perhaps demand that music that is in their archives. Ngos.
My first question would have been to, I didn't get your name, Douglas?
Struan Douglas.
Douglas, yes. There is a book by David Copeland, In Township Tonight, which actually documents extensively the 1950s in the whole of South Africa. It's a very, very historical archive. David Copeland came from the United States as a social anthropologist, has remained in South Africa, played with South African bands. He still plays today. He plays drums. He stays in Johannesburg. Secondly, on the classics that Vuyo raised, Jilo Jilo, Lagu Choli Langa, there is also Chona by Pat Mashikiza from here, from Queenstown. So there's quite a lot of history, and I'm really happy that the memory of Nomvete is brought up, because Nomvete was actually very, very instrumental in promoting jazz music, especially in the border area, in the 1950s and into the 1960s. And it was very, very sad when he died, because only about 12 people came to his funeral. Nobody knew who he was. And I think it's going to be important that when we undertake this work, it cannot be limited to the people that we see. I mean, we do a bit of research so that our work becomes much more empirical, our work becomes much more historical. Otherwise, I'm not sure what our work is if it does not cover the totality of jazz in the country. Thank you.
For sure. Well, I think, Elijah says he doesn't like the word preservation, but the word we're actually looking for is resurrection. We are in the process of resurrecting these great spirits, like we did with Diani, and like we'll surely do with Eric Nomvete as the time comes. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously David Copland is a great contributor and a great fan of music. He's there, and I think there are many voices that contribute to this, and we are part of the collective. But in terms of where you start the story, I mean, Satimir B. Benjamin says, look, the story of jazz starts when the first mother hung her washing on the line, and she sung a lament. And that is the truth, because Sidumo Ngidi says, you know, the whole thing about this jazz story is that it's everlasting. It's an eternal story. It's got no beginning and no end. So then that comes to the question of how do we actually tell these stories? How do we resurrect the great spirits of, as we're talking of Eric Nomveti now, for example? And for me, the answer is so obvious because, you know, we've been blessed to have this interaction with Claude Gawe now. His mom, Faith Gawe, was performing in the Havana Swingsters with Eric Nomveti, and that was where his father, Imrad Mukana, was to meet his mother. So I think this is how we recreate the stories, is we make sure we don't lose the stories that are amongst us. We have these open dialogues, you know, we're blessed to engage with one another, and, you know, to keep these living archives, you know, and that's the beautiful thing about Elam under Diane Trum, the director. She made sure that the archive would become living and start telling the stories of Feya, Retsi, and so on, and all the other voices, because that's it, you know, it's the ones who have passed, they are the inspiration for us to continue the work, and we are all part of this archive, and that's the living archive. So I hope that answers your question.
Good evening. My name is Godfrey Tseisi Masitela. I'm Mokwena, which relates to Madiba. Thanks very much for this opportunity. I have just a few things that I've noted. I don't think that they are necessarily questions. Some of them may be questions. I wish to applaud this august occasion and celebrating one of our own, Retsi Pule. I challenge the organizers to start recording a documentary. Of course, I acknowledge what is being done here, that we are recording the proceedings here. And I also wish to applaud the role of the Steve Biko Center. This is what it was exactly meant for. I didn't hear anything being said about jazz music, South African jazz music, as a liberator. Because I think jazz played an important role. I also wish to appreciate the fact that it has been mentioned here that there was a mention of measure of the creative arts, photography, visual arts, and music as such. It's very important to note the originality of music making, its expression and composition. It didn't just emerge from nowhere. The social aesthetics that were mentioned here, because I believe that jazz, or perhaps music, African music, or musics, they are community-based, and they should appeal to the current generation. The living archives, we cannot do away with that. We really need them. And I could be one of your next visitors, Ndate Madiba. although from a research point of view, I don't want to go deeper into that, but I'm also a scholar. Yeah, I don't want to go deep into that, but perhaps you have already picked up from my language here that the people seated here in front, from a scholarly point of view, say, this is my tribe. There is this, as I say, my concern is that for those who are doing research, you are allowed only to go a few years back. And yet, when you hear what is being said here, we really have to go deep back, because if we go, say, from research papers, they say you should go 5 years back to where they're just stopping short of us getting to the real thing. The evolution and the erosion of African music, whilst preserving and conserving the original music. The original music might not be 5 or 10 years back. I also have a concern about instrumentalization, if I can put it that, if that's the right word, of African music, because African music cannot be notated. But the African music is transferred through oral tradition. And one would also want to see, I'm challenging you in that Retsi, that we should see African instruments in the music. I'm also wondering, there seems to be some influence of Western music in how we compose, in how we present jazz, particularly perhaps American. But African jazz has always been there as well, I take it. I've already talked about the role of jazz as a liberator during the struggle and untold stories and narratives. Towards the end, I also wish to confirm that really jazz and other musics, they are healers.
Ndiyabulisa kumntu wonke okhoyo apha ngaphakathi. First of all, I would like to acknowledge in absentia Dr. April, somewhere here, and Dr. April Opagwinahek at University of Fort Hare, and also they are also doing archiving, you see. And I'm encouraged by the institutions of higher learning, like Rhodes, Umzekelo, what they are doing, Ilam, and also in the University of Fort Hare, and also about archiving the jazz, because it's a very important type of music that we hold dear. And also, enye into encourageayo about jazz is that musicians ezikhoyo now are studying music. And I may not know about other genres ndoba banazo. Yabona scholars ezi deep into this type of music. And you see, the way thina siwuthanda ngakhona lo mculo siyawufunda oba no ube preserved, usoloko uhleli ukhona. As ubhuti bekhe watsho apha isithi no pha emhlobo enene they've got ilanto music abawugcinileyo omninzi esasiwuthanda even before esinomdla into yoba ezinye zezingoma yazi ngaske sikwazi into yoba siphinde sizive, but unfortunately ezinye asiwafumani lo mathuba. Mna ndiyayibulela even neSteve Biko Center because it has afforded us this opportunity, and this unique to us. It seems, in fact, it's unique because right now we're able to engage in talking dialogue about the music that we like. And Ubudu mentioned something that is very important, the protest part of jazz during apartheid times. It reminds me about the band that I know, i-soul jazzmen, as uvuye bekhe wayimention. You see, nengoma zabo, as a result, they were harassed. They were supposed to unyaka to, after they had won a competition in 1976, Soweto, to go to Newport Jazz Festival, but they were denied a passport for going there. In fact, they were harassed for some of these things. And for that matter, they became popular. You see, they become popular for that. So just appreciate mna elithuba kakhulu lento basibe siyahlangana apha, not only about music, also about the conversations, and also nabanye kwezi bands ezi local like Oklot or as bands Oklot, nabantu who are behind their success. For instance, next to me we've got abantu abafana who may not be known, abafana no power, Adams, Mandla Adams, you see, who ensures that everything keeps on going in terms of band Oklot. Across shortages, but so this is great in terms. In fact, I was just trying to express my appreciation for this unusual and appreciative opportunity.
If I can say something about the jazz and its contribution during the apartheid years. We were so lucky that we got to talk to people who were in the soul jazzmen group, or Big T and Dudley Tito, so on, and other people around that time who could tell us the stories of what was happening, when there were rallies, and then they had to, go there and pose as like entertainers so that it looks like it is a concert while they were, discussing political stuff, so on. They told those stories, and we've got them in the archive there. And so the archive is open, and it's there for people to come in who want to do research. So we've got, people like, now that I'm talking about, he was a drummer in PE. Maybe I'll remember the name as we're talking. No. But this man, he was one of the drummers, Richard Hatana, yes, Richard Hatana. Now, Richard Hatana had a lot of photographs that, he took of different musicians and groups, and he gave us those photographs to scan and have them in our archive, so people can see what was happening around that time. He wrote as much as he could, the information that he knew about that. So the information is there. It's just we are an archive, and so it's so much, in a way, dependent on people to come into that archive and find the things in there and write these stories. But some of these things are there. We have managed to collect and interview as many musicians as we could on this, many things. And so visit our archives and you will, I'm advertising now.
Good evening. I am Songeziwe Mahlangu. My question is also posed at Mr. Madiba. I'd like to know, are there any processes in archiving the South African hip-hop story? Because Africans have been talking to drums since the beginning of time, and I'd be interested in an approach which is not so much corporate-based, where radio goes with what corporate says, but rather a people-based approach. Yeah, I think that's my question in a nutshell.
Okay. How we approach these things, whether it's hip hop or any kind of music, is we the main thing that we do is interviews. We visit musicians and we interview them and they tell their stories, and we try and collect as much of their recordings as possible to also include in that in the story. It just happened that our director is so much interested in hip hop. In fact, his PhD thesis was all about hip hop, and he's just written a book which should be out early next year, which is also on hip hop. So maybe look out for that. But what we do is we do interviews. We visit musicians and we ask them questions about. They tell us their story basically, and then that's how we follow their music. And here and there, we afford them opportunities to, because there are a lot of struggling musicians out there. We've got a studio, so we try and give them a chance to record something in the studio so they can, get their music out there, sell and do whatever they like with the music. And so we try and create those opportunities for musicians also to, make a living out of this. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Put Elijah. I think you answered. Are you happy? Vila now Put Elijah. Okay. So guys, we're going to wrap it up, and then we're going to go back to the music deliverance, maybe before we go home. But before I do that, it wouldn't be justice that I leave this panel without having to pose a question to Chester and giving each one of you, Bra Stru, Bra Elijah. In fact, I don't know if you'd like to give your 2 seconds of your words, your last words, because you've been speaking. So I don't know if you'd still like to do it. But Spoki, your 2 minutes, and then Retsi, your 2 minutes. But before the 2 minutes is over, the music, Chester, keeps on evolving as we know it. I always like to use you as an example. So I said, Chester plays, I've met Chester playing with Brian's, I've photographed Chester playing with Chester was there with Oprah Spencer. Chester was with Bralex. And Bradete, Chester has always been there. So he's so much into the South African jazz piano. But Chester is again, he's evolved the music. So I don't know what makes him sleep at night, either the piano or the beat making, or maybe the jazz music. But I think Chester, in sort of talking about building new era and, still staying within the music and convicting it with context, into jazz, but you still need to be young. Because again, remember that people are saying that jazz music is for old people. But as young as you are, you've actually been with most of these guys. So, I think your last words would be to sort of link the younger musicians into, building new era that, you still stay within the context of the music and you convict with context, but you can be a Chester Summerton that's making beats. Yeah, baby.
So, through the course of actually being introduced to this whole jazz idiom, it's not so long since I've actually been playing jazz. I think I started playing jazz in 2018. Right, yeah, and through that space, I've noticed that everywhere I would be playing, everyone seems to be asking me this particular question: why are you playing jazz at such a young age? And I always found it a weird question, that how am I playing jazz and I'm this young? So is jazz linked to a certain age group, or is jazz for everyone? And then in the course of playing jazz from 2018 till present, I've actually noticed that there is a huge lack, especially with the youth, being introduced to what jazz is. And to the jazz purists, it seems like this music is dying. So I've actually went on further to find that there is a link that we could use in reintroducing the jazz music to the younger generation. something as small as including the harmonic changes from the jazz music into different genres, then therefore that's how we could actually be tapping into reintroducing this music to the younger generation. Like let's say for an example, with the hip hop cats, like Uputi has mentioned hip hop, jazz is being introduced in hip hop often and often, where you find producers like the late American hip hop producer Jay Dilla sampling John Coltrane from times. Usis Vuyo did mention that Utatu Andile Yenana was sampled by an American hip hop producer and rapper J. Cole in their song called Legendary. You can go check that out on YouTube, it's there, Legendary. And they sampled his particular tune, Utembisa the People. In doing so, it's introducing this jazz music to people. And if you were to find on TikTok, there's this trend now where younger people want to trace where these popular musicians are actually getting this music from. And then they're able to find that the source is these very jazz musicians that are deemed for the older people. So I feel like as the younger generation, I'm taking it due upon myself to be amongst the people and the peers that I am currently working with. I'm currently working with people about Abenza Amapiano in Johannesburg, and we are trying to find a link in adding jazz harmonic music or sampling jazz records to try and introduce the younger people to this music. I mean, like, I feel like jazz shouldn't be for older generations, but it's music that unites the young and the old. So yeah.
So in closing, I just wanted to address Vuyo's question, you know, why does Mankunku write Yakal and Komo, and why do people write these songs? And you know, a lot of the contemporary jazz words, contemporary jazz players, they use this word alchemy and they throw it around freely. But actually alchemy is the transformation of sadness into joy. And as a matter of fact, Winston Mankunku said, why did he write Crossroads? Was to transform the sadness into joy. So I think this is the thing of longevity. Why is this music lasting so long? It is an alchemical process. So immediately I would caution people against following trends, because trends don't have that alchemy. They might be able to transform, you know, your likes on so on, but they may not have an impact on one another. So I would like to leave you with the thought of the power of alchemy within music, and specifically with jazz, because jazz is a term that has come to embody and mean freedom. So it ties it into the struggle and why you have Diani and Biko legacies merging, why you have Retsi, Pule and his great-grandparents, the Kniwe legacy merging, because it is all a legacy of liberation and trying to find our freedom through our music, and then trying to share our freedom with one another and create this alchemical process of transformation of the sadness into joy. So that's my closing remarks. Thank you so much.
My closing words are, it's a challenge for most archive institutions, ne? Or when I say archive institutions, I don't mean ILM only, no NAHEX. I mean us individually as well. The way we narrate our stories and the way we view or see archives. There are many untold stories within jazz, the jazz conundrum, and also there are a lot of jazz voices or the jazz voice of women in the archive. And that doesn't seem to pop out for me, because when due process is being done, is documentaries, it's always the male epitome, of which the female is seen as an undertone, right? So for me, it's a challenge for us all. how do we sivakalise imbono and the works of Omama Upinise, Margaret Mcingana, and the list is endless of the women's South African jazz narrative.
I've always been on a mission to encourage the youth of today into jazz. Yes. Even if someone says, I'm a piano inclined, I'm hip hop inclined, what have you. It's not going to be difficult. It's not because my approach is rhythmical. That's my approach. Yeah. It's rhythmical according to his or her own genre of favor, yeah. That's how my approach is going to be, to maintain and to strengthen jazz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you so much for those beautiful closing words. In my closing, well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming through. And we've been doing a lot of talking. Sometimes the talking, could be tiring to a lot of people, as much as the music could be tiring. Other people sometimes get jazzed out. Other people get talked out. So for everyone that came through and listened to this story, thank you so much for coming. And if there's anyone that maybe has a child that wants to do music, I know in our families, we are told that music is not the way to go. So then we start pursuing dreams of our parents. I was a product of that until a very late age. Then I needed to sort of exercise who I was as a creative. So if you have kids that want to do the music, our thing is to teach, to include, to impart, and to sort of empathize with the music. So to the archivists that are here, guys, thank you so much. I hope as much as the talking has been, the music has also been healing. So from me, again, thank you so much. So we'll then take it back to Ukianit. Thank you so much, guys.